sorry I can't be with you today, so I've sent my avatar to give the presentation. I'm Tim Merel from Digi-Capital. We're an AR and VR advisor. We do four things. We've got our analytics platform, which is a dashboard to the AR and VR industry. There's over 500,000 data points in it. You can see it on screen now. Our reports on the industry, the latest quarterly is over 370 pages long, so there's a lot of detail about what's going on in the market. Strategy consulting, helping large corporates navigate the industry and startups to go faster. And lastly, investment banking, again, helping large corporates to buy startups, helping startups to sell themselves so they can go and live on the beach. Now, the industry is very early stage, but already quite crowded. There are lots of companies doing very different things, but a lot of companies also doing the same things. When we look at the industry from the consumer perspective, and I won't go into all the detail with this, when we look at use cases in particular, we see that there are a number of them that are already happening that are doing well. So what Google is doing with maps, what Snapchat and Instagram are doing with filters, Pokemon Go and so on. But a lot more is needed around use cases, so there's still a way to go. In terms of the enterprise side, it's a different case, more green and orange, less red. And in particular around use cases, we're already seeing enterprises delivering really serious return on investment from using AR and VR, and I'll give you some examples as we get further in. From an installed base perspective, last year mobile AR hit around 850 million installed base. Now, by that I don't mean active users. Installed base here is compatible and configured devices. Active users is a much lower number. In terms of headsets, there were less than 20 million installed base last year, dominated by mobile and standalone VR, and then console and PC VR, smart glasses, and so on. Now, I'm going to use the demo version of our analytics platform to talk you through some of the rest of the numbers. So you won't see the numbers, data, and axes that you do in the subscription version, but I'll call out numbers and data as we go through. We look at our hardware and software installed base. Again, there's 850 million last year, which we forecast going to over 2.5 billion in the next 5 years' time. If we back out of that and look at just headsets alone, so smart glasses and VR, we're looking at around 100 million in the same time frame. But for that to happen, a couple of things, in our view, need to happen first. The first one, since 2016, we've forecast that Apple could launch smartphone tethered smart glasses in the fourth quarter of next year. But only Tim Cook and his inner circle really know if that's going to happen, so here's hoping. The second thing is the second generation of premium standalone VR. And what I mean by that is what's happening this year with Oculus Quest is great, but it isn't really an inflection point for the market yet. Our view is that the hardware needs to get better, it needs to get cheaper, and the software needs to get better for VR to really hit that inflection point in the next 18 to 24 months. If we look at it from a revenue perspective, first we see that last year the industry earned just under 7 billion revenue globally, which doesn't sound like a really big number compared to, say, mobile, but for such an early stage industry, it's a real achievement and it should be celebrated. Going forward, VR could drive 10 to 15 billion revenue in 5 years, and AR much larger at 70 to 75 billion split between smart glasses and mobile AR, so a different order of magnitude. But that growth isn't a straight line. It doesn't go straight from here to there, and business model scales and growth rates are very different on the three major platform types. So let's look at what that could look like in 5 years. From a revenue perspective, we'll start with mobile AR. Now there, we expect that mobile AR will be dominated by e-commerce sales, so companies selling everything from cars to clothing to toys, and advertising, particularly on the messaging platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, WeChat, and so on. Now, when most people think about platform revenue, they think about actually App Store revenues, which we forecast taking only about a quarter of all mobile AR revenues in 5 years. Today, that's dominated by games, particularly Pokemon Go, but there are over 20 different app categories that we track, and with all the different use cases and businesses coming up, we think that non-games apps could take over half of all App Store revenues, so in-app purchase and premium apps in 5 years. If we then look at VR, broadly the makeup we expect to be fairly similar to where it is today, where games dominate in terms of revenue, then hardware, Then enterprise software and services, which is emerging, and again we'll go through some examples, as well as the other consumer revenue streams around video, location-based entertainment, and so on. Lastly, the smart glasses. For consumer revenue streams to really scale, you need installed base in the hundreds of millions to billions, and even if Apple enters towards the end of next year or the following year, we're not looking at a market that's bigger than tens of millions of installed base. So all of the consumer revenue streams will naturally be relatively small. So we expect smart glasses to stay dominated by hardware specifically, and then enterprise software and services. So in terms of what that growth path could look like and what the inflection points might be, for mobile AR e-commerce and advertising need time to scale. So we're already seeing folks like Burger King and Amazon and others who are using it, but it's still early days. It's not mainstream yet. And that could take another, again, 18 to 24 months. The smart glasses, really our view is that the inflection point is if Apple enters, and if it enters, when it enters. If it doesn't, then the growth rate of the market we think could look very different. And then lastly, VR, where premium standalone VR needs that second generation in the next couple of years to really be an inflection point for growth. Now, those top-level numbers at the total revenue stage I was talking about before are interesting and they're fine for bragging rights, but you can't really build a business using them, and you can't really raise money using VCs. You need to be more specific, more detailed. So let's dig a level deeper and look at how you get down to what works on your platform. So if we start with, say, mobile AR, and also looking at specific categories, so looking at, say, mobile AR education apps. So as opposed to the large numbers we were talking about before, how big could that market be next year? Well, we forecast that being just over $70 million next year, which sounds like an okay number, but it's a global market. It's not all in one place. And around half of that market, a bit more, driven out of Asia, particularly China, Japan, and South Korea. Around a quarter in Europe, which is great. Europe is actually, at a regional level, the second largest region for AR and VR in this space. But as with all things European, it's fragmented. So you've got over 40 different countries, languages, with Brexit on the horizon, different regulatory regimes. So managing that complexity requires a lot of work. And then lastly, North America, where it will take about a fifth of revenue, but it has the advantage of being a consolidated market. So for companies that are based in the States, if they can make it work in the US and Canada, then it's a good basis for going out to Europe and out to Asia. So that global market that I was talking about before isn't the total addressable market for a mobile AR education app developer. If, say, it was one that was based in the UK, so in that specific country and aiming at that market, well, that market next year is going to be less than $3 million revenue for the total market, which isn't really enough to be able to sustain a team, even if you take a good chunk of it, and it's certainly not enough to attract investment from VCs. So that's when you have to start thinking about, well, how do you play the different countries? So if with language, that company could go out to Ireland, and then Australia and New Zealand, and lastly, North America with the US and Canada. Well, what does that look like? Well, that market's just under 20 million, so a much larger addressable market. So the point I'm trying to make here is really, when you're looking at how you build your business, or if you're trying to raise money, you need to focus on your specific products and services, on your platforms, in your categories and countries, because that's the detail you need to get to. Now, the next bit, I really want to give some tips to the startups in the room, particularly the ones where they haven't raised money before, or they've only raised, say, an accelerator round and aren't really familiar with the process. Fundraising is a contact sport. We track thousands of funds globally, and there are a lot of people you need to consider. Now, the funds vary by growth stage. So in terms of, say, Series B rounds, there are just over 300 funds that have invested in AR and VR Series Bs in all of time. But if we look half that number, and in Europe it's less. So you really need to understand who's investing in your region at your stage. It's really important to know where the smart money is going and where it isn't, because not all categories, not all stages, not all deal sizes are attracting the same level of investment, and some aren't attracting very much investment at all. And all the VC and corporate investors are different. So most people, when they think about a VC, think about somebody in jeans and a sports jacket. But they don't all look like that. They don't all sound the same, they don't all think the same. All the VC firms are different, and you have to approach them as individuals and understand them as individuals. So let's say you like Mark Andreessen and you want to try to raise funds from his firm, Andreessen Horowitz. Well, the first thing we see is that they've only ever done one or two AR or VR deals per quarter. So if they've invested in, say, 2 AR and VR companies this quarter, your chances of raising money from them are almost zero. But let's say you're raising Series A, and now we see that they've actually only invested in 4 AR and VR Series A's in all of time. So you have to be a really special company to get Andreessen Horowitz to invest in your AR and VR firm. But let's say you're really convinced that they were ones for you. The next thing is understanding each of the individual funds' portfolios, who they've already given money to. And there are 2 reasons for doing this. The first is to get insights by category and stage and country, and just the types of companies that they like to invest in, the dynamics they're looking for. The other side, the risk side, is look, many VCs are very honourable, and if you give them your slide deck talking about your secret sauce, why you're better than everybody else in the market, they won't go ahead and give it to a portfolio company that's your direct competitor. But not all VCs are like that, and so you need to manage those risks. So if you know who's in their portfolio, it gives you a chance of knowing how to manage those risks. Also, one of the best ways to get to VCs, particularly if you don't actually already have the relationships, is by being introduced by a portfolio company CEO who they've already given money to, because this is obviously somebody they already trust. So if you know somebody in the portfolio, then they can potentially get you to Mark Andreessen with a warm introduction, which is one of the best ways to get introduced to a VC. Now, the last bit I want to talk about here is valuation. And again, this is a tricky subject for early stage startups who haven't done this before. Many startups think about trying to get the highest valuation that they can get. But actually, that can hurt you in the long run if you get too high a valuation. And really, valuation is not about that, it's about market norms. It's about what the market expects in terms of the ranges and the averages for valuations, depending on what you're doing. That varies significantly by category in AR and VR, so the different categories don't attract the same sort of valuations, and also it varies even more by stage. And the last piece, and this is a really critical piece, particularly for European companies, where sometimes you need to look outside the European region to look for VC money, is it varies significantly by geographic market. So if we look at, say, what's typically one of the high valuation markets, China, if let's say you went and you got an anchor VC in your fundraising round who was Chinese, and they gave you a valuation that was a really strong one, and you were very pleased with that. If you came to, say, Europe or, say, North America, where the average valuations for your category and your stage are lower, you just priced all those VCs out of coming into your round. In other words, they don't think your company's worth what the Chinese VC think it's worth, and therefore they won't enter, even if they really like you. So thinking about the staging, which VCs you approach and try to bring in as anchors when and who you bring in later, is critical to whether you can actually close a round from a good group of VCs. Now, I'd like to go from all the hard numbers and charts and colours and give you some real-world examples as to people who are really making it work in the market today. I'm going to start with House. House is basically an online e-commerce furniture retailer. They sell couches and desks and lamps. They took what they were doing with their mobile app that was all in 2D and moved it to 3D for mobile powered e-commerce. Now, when you look at what their app now does, they basically brought in a team of folks from the games industry who knew about 3D and how to make it work, so that for your average customer who knows nothing about visualization and 3D, they can, without actually being aware of how it works, look at a piece of furniture in their room with the right color, the right sizing, in context. And it gives them the ability to do something which seems invisible. The user doesn't think of this as mobile AR, they just think that it works. Now, the results that they got for this are nothing short of extraordinary. From using mobile AR, from introducing 3D into their app, They increased customers' likelihood of purchasing by 11 times. Now, in e-commerce, if you get a 5% increase from any technology, that's a huge result. But 11 times is completely unheard of, and it wouldn't have been possible without mobile AR. Really, in e-commerce, they're one of the great success stories of mobile AR so far. Staying in the retail space, and now looking more at retail when it comes to stores, we're going to look at Olay and how they used AI and computer vision to transform retail. Now, Olay introduced their Skin Advisor app. On the face of it, quite a simple thing. It takes a picture of your face, it then works out what it thinks is your skin age, and then it recommends a regime of beauty products, skincare products, to make your skin look good. Not surprisingly, a lot of Olay products, which doesn't, it can sound like quite a simple concept, but again, the results they delivered are really strong. It's been used by 4 million customers in over 10 countries. They've doubled conversion rates. So again, the customers are twice as likely to purchase as if they didn't have the app. They increased basket sizes, so the amount people spend per purchase, by 30% globally and by 40% in China. But the really clever bit, and the thing that I particularly like about this, is what they did with all the data that they got from this app. They analysed it very carefully so they could really understand the customers' purchasing intentions and how that worked. And they had a new product launch with Olay Whips. They then went to all of the big box retailers, so the big retail stores. And first, they got shelf space that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get at all for a new product launch like this. But they also got much larger shelf space because they could prove to the retailers before they actually launched the product what demand was going to look like. And off the back of that, they had the biggest product launch they've had in 10 years. Again, wouldn't have been possible without this technology. Staying with retail, I'm going to move over to Walmart, one of the big retailers themselves, and how they've shrunk core user loops in retail. Now, for the game developers in the audience, you'll be familiar with the concept of core user loops. It's basically, in a game, how you get the player from point A to point B. In retail, you have the same idea. You want to get the customer, purchaser, to go from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Now, what Walmart had noticed was, with the existing Walmart app, that customers were already using the barcode scanner piece to do price comparisons. But it was very clumsy. It took a long time. So they looked at that behavior, they developed the AR scanner so that they could shrink the time it took to do price comparisons in half. It reduced the time people were spending shopping, they put more into their trolleys, they got out faster with what they wanted, very happy. And the thing that, again, I really love about this app is if you look at the interface on screen, there's no branding. It's an invisible UI. The only thing that the user sees is what they need to see. It's as simple as possible, layering the minimum amount of information on the real world. Now, I'm going to move from the pure retail side onto something where it's looking at customer-facing business, but as it goes back into customer service, with a company called Stream out of Portland. And they've been looking at how to make the world's experts more accessible for customers and for their clients. Now, the app itself looks not unremarkable. If you think about, say, Vuforia Chalk, it's broadly similar. It allows the person, the expert at the other end, to layer things off the real world to help a customer when they're diagnosing a problem or trying to fix a problem. So nothing spectacular in that regard. But again, what they did with it is the clever bit. They're focusing on cutting service costs and leveraging the data they get from doing that. Now, while they focus on a range of industries, they particularly focus on the white goods and insurance industries in terms of client focus. For those customers, they use computer vision and mobile AR to connect the customer with the call center, so not with an actual expert or service person. And using spatial mapping, mobile AR, object recognition, and OCR, they were able to cut truck roll service times. And by that I mean getting a service person into a car or a truck, sending them out to the customer to do a service call by up to 42%, which is a huge cost saving. But again here, the really clever bit is a little bit like the Olay story, where what they did with the data is what really makes us sing. All that data they're capturing from using the app, they then analyze and they feed back to the clients who are servicing the customers. They then take that data, feed it back into their product development, service development, their servicing programs, their maintenance programs, and how they deal with their calls. Using mobile AR is allowing the overall business, the core business, to operate better. which is, again, a very strong result for such an early stage technology. Now, we're going to move further into the enterprise and look at Striver. We're in the training space. Now there, CEO Derek Belch was, as you can see, he's wearing one of the early Oculuses on his face, was a football player at Stanford. He was in Jeremy Balanson's class. And Jeremy and Derek spun Striver out of Stanford to be a VR training company focusing in on elite sports, and in particular, focusing in on the NFL. And with that approach, they did very well indeed. They got most of the NFL teams, the gridiron teams, as clients. Now, this was a great success early on, but when they went to their VCs to try and raise their next round, the VCs said, look, we think sports is great as a vertical, but it's not big enough. Can you try and go to enterprise? So they listened to what the VCs had to say, and then they got incredibly lucky. One of the people at one of the NFL teams that was a client was good friends with somebody at Walmart, and they got Walmart as a customer. And they didn't get Walmart just as a customer, they got Walmart as a partner that helped them to transform from a good startup, with tens of, maybe 30 people or so, to an enterprise software and solutions business with over 130 staff. Now, with that evolution from NFL to enterprise, they have what we think is the biggest single rollout of VR headsets so far, 17,000, almost 5,000 stores, and 1 million employees trained, 70% of which had their training scores improved. Now, off the back of that, they got Verizon as a client, United Rentals, Fidelity, and for, say, one of the big Fortune 100 insurance companies, they've reduced training times from 3 hours to 25 minutes. So you're saving significant costs, you're improving employee performance, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, so a big win all around. Staying in that sort of training knowledge space, we're going to look at a company called Tactile, where they worked with HoloLens to help King County on the West Coast to leapfrog technology for knowledge transfer. Now, King County, and particularly the waste treatment plant, which was the focus of the work, the waste treatment plant, as you can see, is a very, very large plant. It's got a huge amount of facilities in terms of physical infrastructure. But all of the controls in the building and inside this facility are also substantial. There are corridors and corridors filled with old machines that have got flashing red lights, orange lights, green lights, buttons of all sorts of different colours. Now, the only way of navigating all of this are paper manuals, thick paper manuals. Unfortunately, in the middle of the night, they had a disaster. There was a major sewage spill into the Puget Sound. At the time, there was one employee on staff. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning. This employee had been working there for 1 month. So they had these manuals, they had no idea what to do. By phone, they couldn't reach anybody because everybody was asleep. There was literally no way of avoiding the disaster. So basically, having done the audit on what was going on, they decided they had to leapfrog generations and move from paper manuals to using HoloLens and Tactile with their manifest software to be able to enable employees to work in real time and see exactly what they need to do in terms of regular operations, but also emergencies. Now, the other thing that was going on there is, as you would expect, a sewage treatment plant is not a glamorous job. It's not something that everybody wants to do. And they have a retiring workforce, people who've worked there for decades. But again, operating with old school technology and needing to try and bring people in, attracting young staff is difficult. So evolving from paper manuals to smart glasses, as well as preserving that knowledge from the retiring employees, they've also found a number of the employees who are going to retire have decided not to. They've decided to stay because they're having fun. If you think about the basic human need of feeling you're doing meaningful work, well, this is giving people a sense of purpose in a way that they didn't have, just because they're able to show that the knowledge they have is valuable and transmit that to younger people using smart glasses. And for a facility that is critical for this community, they're future-proofing it. Now, going from something that's very much of the earth up into the sky, we're going to look at Bell Helicopter and how they've used VR to design the helicopter of the future for today. Now, Bell wanted to build this magnificent helicopter. I mean, it's a beautiful thing in and of itself, but I'm not going to talk about the details of that. That's not the story here. The story is how they went about building it. They transformed traditional design processes. Now, traditionally, if you're going to be building an aircraft like this, and Bell knows this from decades of experience, it takes 5 to 7 years to bring that sort of product to market. There's all of the detailed CAD work, then there are initial prototypes in metal and glass, testing of those, more of that, and so on. What they found was using HTC5, CAD, and Unity, they were able to cut that time down to 6 months. That's a huge time and cost saving on this sort of capital project. The implications are, while they're substantial on the cost side, are much bigger on the revenue side, because these products cost in the millions, or in some cases tens of millions of dollars. So a huge impact on the top line, but also disrupting competitive advantage in very established markets. So if your competitor is taking 5 to 7 years and you're taking 6 months to bring product to market, that's a huge advantage. Now, the last example I'm going to focus in on is going even higher up in the atmosphere, going from the sky to space, and looking at Lockheed Martin and how they've been building spacecraft faster, cheaper, and better using smart glasses. Now, Lockheed Martin has been building satellites and spacecraft for decades. And their latest is Project Orion, that you can see here. Now, Project Orion is the next space capsule to take astronauts to the moon and then orbit the moon for 6 months, up to 6 months, while they're down on the surface working, and autonomously, and then when the astronauts come back up, take them comfortably and safely back to Earth. Now, comfortably and safely means something quite extreme in this instance, because they're coming back into the atmosphere at 24,000 miles an hour at a surface temperature roughly equivalent to the surface of the sun. So mistakes are not possible. Any mistake is deadly. But being an older company, they were quite old school as well. For non-clean room facilities, they use paper manuals. If it's a clean room, they use screens, but if you're working inside a cramped capsule, it can be quite difficult to work around a screen. So again, they decided they would try and move across to smart glasses. And the results they got were nothing short of amazing, unheard of in the satellite and space industry. They cut training time and costs by 85%, but the operational improvements were even greater. The early ones you can see at the top were already impressive, but now they are regularly getting over 90% time and cost reduction. So if you think of very highly trained, highly paid technicians, it's a huge improvement. And they're getting these results not just with people who've been doing the job for years, but they're getting these results with people who've been doing the job for only 3 months. So it's extraordinary. But the other piece is error prevention. Now, if you or I drive our car down to the mechanic and they make a mistake, well, we drive it back. But if you're building a satellite and something gets drilled wrong, or if it gets missed and put up into space, well, you can't really send up a repairman. Now, there's already been an example where there was a panel, it was late in the evening, they were finishing up, it was going to be drilled backwards. The solution spotted the mistake, stopped it from happening, saved them millions of dollars. So again, huge result. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with really 5 thoughts. The first is, it's still a very early stage market from both the consumer and enterprise perspective. But AR and VR are driving high return on investment in some sectors already today, and we've talked through some of the examples just now. We're looking at potentially an 80 to 90 billion revenue market in 5 years' time, but it's going to take time. There's lots to go between here and there. And the mobile AR, smart glasses, and VR platforms are all very different, so how you think about building your business for those different platforms has to be similarly different. And the last piece is really the granular detail, and the focus on that detail is how the people we've talked about before have succeeded. So for you to succeed, you have to get it right in those detailed ways. Thank you.